everybody. Welcome. My name is Conlon, and I'm a contributor at the Prickly Pear. Today, I wanted to talk about something I have mentioned several times in videos, which is citizenship, because it is, to me, and I've said it explicitly, to me it is the defining issue of Donald Trump's presidency. Everything else, in a way, is tied into trying to reclaim American citizenship. And that's just because at the basis of the American political community is the concept of citizenship. We're a civic community. We're a community of citizens. And once that goes away, it by its very self abolishes the American nation. If you don't have a group of citizens, you don't have a nation. So this is, of course, a proxy for the illegal immigration and all of that. But I wanted to maybe talk a little more theoretically about what I think American citizenship is, because it's very different from the citizenship of other nations. And when the American nation was first founded, it was revolutionary. In fact, it was probably the most revolutionary thing about the Revolutionary War was the type of citizenship that the American founders established. Remember that in the English common law tradition, what governed citizenship was a concept called jus soli, or law of the soil. And this ties into the birthright citizenship debate, right? The idea that if you're born on American soil, you're automatically an American citizen, which is a real impoverishment of American citizenship as it was understood by the founders, because the founders explicitly rejected law of the soil as the basis of the American community, and instead it was consent. And beyond consent forming the basis of a free country, a country ordered by liberty, I want to think of American citizenship as basically a form of Aristotelian friendship. And what I mean by that is Aristotle had this concept of friendship, and he said that the highest form of friendship is when two people fall in love with each other, but they fall in love with each other while at the same time falling in love with a transcendent third. If you've ever listened to Bishop Robert Barron, this is one of his formulas he's constantly mentioning. He mentioned it on Tucker Carlson's podcast a few weeks ago. So the highest forms of friendship are the friendship that exists between people who not only love each other and want what's best for each other, but also are in love with God or the pursuit of knowledge or something like that. And if you read the Declaration of Independence in particular, what emerges is a group of men who quite clearly love each other because they're willing to pledge their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honors. So in other words, they're willing to pledge their lives, their properties, and their reputations to each other in defense of their own liberty. That's the three most valuable things a man has, is his life, his property, and his reputation. And it was Christ himself who said, "No greater love hath a man than to lay down his life for his friends." And so it's clear from the Declaration of Independence itself that the American founders were a group of men who loved each other in that Christian way, who were willing to pledge everything in defense of each other. But it wasn't just men who loved each other. It was men who had fallen in love with their God-given rights, which is explicitly mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. What Jefferson calls the self-evident truths. All men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, And so the the type of citizenship that bound the American founders together, that was at the very beginning of our nation, was actually a form of deep, deep friendship. It was a group of people who not only loved each other and were willing to pledge everything in defense of each other's liberties, but precisely so because they had fallen in love with their God-given rights. So deeply in love that they were willing to lose their own lives again in defense of those liberties. And over time, that concept of citizenship has been bastardized and dissipated until, as John Daniel Davidson over at The Federalist put it, citizenship has been reduced to a neutral administrative process. So that's where the phrase undocumented immigrants come from, right? They're just immigrants who don't have the right documents, as opposed to a documented immigrant. A legal immigrant is somebody who has the right piece of paper. And that supposedly is what citizenship consists of, is having the right piece of paper. The only universe in which that concept of citizenship exists is a value-neutral universe, because citizenship in itself is valuable. Why? Because without a set of values shared in common, a community does not exist. So when people talk about citizenship as having the right documents, when you hear the phrase undocumented immigrants, all they're doing is, by the very language they're using, they're abolishing a community of values. They're saying, we don't need to agree on the same values. We just all need to have the right piece of paper. And even if you don't have the right piece of paper, what real difference does it make? And that's a recipe for disunity and incohesion and the sort of hatred, the sort of ethnic divides and the sort of tribal divides that we're seeing explode across America in our major cities. And this is why I truly do believe that the only way, I mean, it's really nice to say that Donald Trump is going to save America. I think he'll have a large role to play in that. But what's going to save America is Christianity. Because if we're really going to reclaim this idea of a community of values, people who are not only friends with one another, neighbors with one another, willing to sacrifice for one another, but people who at the same time have fallen in love with a transcendent third, being their God-given rights, that can only be recovered through Christianity. It cannot be recovered through a secular populism. And I do want to state that openly. I think the only path for America's salvation, the only way to save American citizenship as it was intended by the founders, as it was laid out and so eloquently explained in the Declaration of Independence, is through Christianity. Because Christianity is a religion that binds people together in pursuit of the highest good. But ultimately, it's what the founders themselves relied on to justify these inalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I'll leave you with that. Thank you very, very much for watching.